the illusion of separation.
When you first hold a newborn, tiny fingers curl around yours. A small heartbeat presses against your chest. An instinct tells you, this is my child, my flesh and blood. The phrase seems poetic, sentimental, natural, yet physics and biology suggest something far stranger and more unsettling, that the boundary between parent and child is neither clean nor absolute. Richard Feynman, the Nobel-winning physicist renowned for exposing the universe's hidden structure, often reminded his audiences that what we perceive as solid, separate, or permanent is an illusion generated by scale and convenience. Atoms, molecules, cells, energy, and information do not recognize the labels humans assign. They obey laws indifferent to notions of me and you, parent and child. Conception does not conjure matter from nothing. It reorganizes pre-existing atoms into new arrangements, guided by genetic instructions inherited from both parents, creating a system simultaneously continuous with its progenitors and entirely new. The child's DNA, half maternal and half paternal, encodes sequences that will guide development, determine physical structure, and establish the baseline for neural wiring and bodily processes. These sequences are not static objects, but patterns instantiated in molecules that themselves are transient. Atoms forming the DNA today are not the same atoms that existed a decade ago. In the parent cell's matter constantly recycles, replacing itself over weeks, months, years. The continuity is informational rather than material, but it is nonetheless real. Beyond DNA, biological exchange continues in ways that blur the line between mother and child. During gestation, cells cross the placental barrier bidirectionally. Maternal cells enter the fetus, fetal cells enter the mother. Some of these cells remain for decades, inhabiting organs including the heart, liver, and even the brain. Scientists term this microchimerism. It is a striking, measurable phenomenon. Parts of a child reside physically in the parent long after birth, and parts of the parent remain embedded in the child. These are not metaphorical transfers, they are tangible, persistent presences, molecular imprints of one organism inside another. Feynman emphasized that the human body is not a static object. It is a dynamic process, a continuously reorganizing system of molecules, chemical reactions, electrical patterns, and energy flows. Within several years, most of the atoms composing a human body are replaced by new ones from the environment. Nothing remains fixed except patterns of organization. By this measure, individuality is ephemeral at the atomic scale. When a child is conceived, what propagates forward is not substance but pattern, an intricate set of arrangements and sequences that instruct cells to grow, differentiate, and self-organize into a coherent organism. Life is continuity enacted through transformation, a persistent process embedded within matter and energy that obeys universal physical laws. Beyond genes and cells, the parent's influence extends through behavioral and neurological pathways. The developing brain of a child is extraordinarily sensitive to environmental input, particularly in the earliest years. Language exposure, tone, rhythm, gestures, expressions, and patterns of emotional response shape synaptic connections in the child's neural network. Children internalize and mirror these patterns unconsciously, creating echoes of parental thought, emotion, and behavior within their own nervous systems. Habits, fears, and even the structure of attention can emerge directly from these interactions. The child becomes not only a continuation of genetic patterns, but a partially encoded extension of parental neural architecture, influenced by repeated exposure, reinforcement, and imitation. Evolution amplifies and legitimizes this persistence. Genes are not concerned with personal experience or identity. They propagate because patterns that can self-replicate survive over generations. In a sense, parents are temporary carriers, vehicles for information encoded in matter that is designed to persist beyond individual lifespans. Instinctual care for offspring, the protective drive, the nurturing response, all these behaviors emerge as extensions of evolutionary imperatives. Feynman would note that explaining mechanisms in no way diminishes the wonder of human experience. The universe's apparent indifference is compatible with all. The implications, however, are profound. They challenge the intuitive, comforting sense of separate, bounded identity. The atoms forming your body were forged billions of years ago in supernova. The oxygen you breathe, the carbon in your bones, the hydrogen and water molecules circulating through your cells were once part of other organisms, plants, animals, and even distant celestial bodies. Matter flows constantly through time and space. Reproduction merely channels part of this flow into a new configuration. The child is composed in part of the same ancient atoms that constitute the parent, yet arranged in a new pattern. Separation, identity, ownership, and singularity are provisional at best. Love, instinct, care, and attachment emerge from entangled systems of matter and energy that persist across organisms rather than from immutable individuality. At the scale of atoms, electrons and protons do not recognize ownership. They obey physical laws blindly, indifferent to the human desire for boundaries. Identity emerges not from matter itself, but from organization, pattern, and continuity of information. The child is neither wholly the parent nor entirely separate. They are a branching extension, a reconfiguration of matter and code that preserves continuity while introducing divergence. This continuity is amplified by development, entanglement, language, gestures, behavioral modeling, neural influence, and emotional imprinting, create long-term correlations between parent and child beyond the genetic level. The developing child absorbs these patterns unconsciously, establishing feedback loops of influence that persist over decades. Parents shape the physical, chemical, and behavioral substrate of the child as surely as they contribute genetic sequences. Viewed through Feynman's lens, the perception of sharp separation is an illusion generated by scale. Individuality is a temporary arrangement, a whirlpool in a vast river of matter, energy, and information. Children are currents within this river, flowing forward from the same source, carrying fragments of the parent's pattern while creating entirely new configurations. Death does not erase these patterns. The matter and information continue, redistributed, reshaped, reconfigured. Over evolutionary time, behavioral patterns, neural influences, and genetic sequences propagate further, forming a vast, ongoing, entangled web of life. Identity, self, ownership, and separateness are constructs that work at the human scale but dissolve under scrutiny. The child is simultaneously part of the parent, a new individual, and a node in a continuum of life stretching backward and forward through time. The implications are unsettling. Your child is part of you materially, genetically, behaviorally, and informationally, yet fully autonomous in emergent ways. Boundaries are provisional, and the distinction between self and other is in fact a matter of scale, perspective, and convenience rather than absolute physical reality. Understanding this blurs the line between inheritance and individuality, between influence and identity, revealing a universe in which separation is a temporary fiction and continuity is the rule. Life is continuity enacted through transformation, and children are both extensions of their parents and entirely new expressions of matter, pattern, and process, entangled in ways that defy simple classification. The apparent separateness we experience is an emergent artifact, a convenient fiction, but the reality Feynman illuminated is stark at the deepest levels of matter, information, and energy. You and your child are entangled, inseparable, and part of the same ongoing dynamic process that is life itself. In part one, we established that the boundary between parent and child is provisional, permeable, and largely defined by scale. Matter flows between bodies, genetic sequences propagate forward, and neural patterns echo across generations. In part two, the focus shifts from matter to pattern, from cells to information, from genetic inheritance to the subtle architecture of identity, behavior, and continuity. Richard Feynman repeatedly insisted that the universe is less about fixed objects than about dynamic interactions. The human body, like all systems, is a process, a transient configuration of matter, energy, and information constantly shaped by internal and external forces. DNA is often described simplistically as passed down from parent to child, but this is misleading. DNA is not an object. It is a set of instructions encoded in molecular structure, a dynamic algorithm instantiated in transient atoms. Atoms themselves are replaced over time. The carbon in a DNA strand today may not be the same carbon present a decade ago in the parent, yet the pattern, the informational structure, persists, replicates, and evolves. The child inherits not static substance, but a continuity of instructions capable of self-organization, growth, and adaptation. This continuity, however, extends beyond the genetic level. The developing brain of a child is a malleable system, highly responsive to external stimuli, particularly the interactions with caregivers. Language, tone, intonation, rhythm, gestures, emotional reactions, and subtle behavioral cues directly influence neural wiring. Synaptic connections strengthen or weaken in response to repeated exposure. Habits, fears, patterns of attention, and moral inclinations are shaped, reinforced, and propagated, forming echoes of parental neural structures. In essence, behavior and cognition propagate similarly to genes. Evolution amplifies and codifies this organism's act as vehicles for replicating information patterns that have proven robust over millennia. Parents' influence, therefore, is not solely genetic, it is also structural, neurological, and behavioral. From the standpoint of continuity, the child becomes a new instantiation of a pre-existing pattern, reorganized to accommodate novel influences, yet intrinsically connected to the parent's architecture. Feynman would observe that at atomic and subatomic scales, boundaries are meaningless. Electrons, protons, and neutrons do not distinguish ownership or individuality, they obey universal physical laws. Human distinctions, body, self, identity, parent-child, exist at the emergent scale of complex systems, not at the fundamental scale of matter. The flow of matter and energy ensures that patterns are propagated continuously, branching and diverging as they progress. Consciousness, too, can be viewed as emergent behavior arising from complex interactions of neurons, neurotransmitters, and electrical signals. Memories are not static. Recalling an experience rewrites it. Neural architectures are not fixed. They adapt in response to input and interaction. When children develop in the context of parental presence, their brains absorb, internalize, and respond to patterns of behavior, speech, emotional resonance, and action. This creates structural continuity at a level more subtle than genes but no less real. By this measure, identity is relational rather than absolute. Self is not an isolated monolith, but a temporary knot in an ongoing network of interactions. Children, in inheriting genetic sequences, in absorbing behavioral patterns, and in internalizing neural architectures, are not mere extensions of parental influence. They are active nodes in an evolving system. At this stage, distinctions between parent and child become deeply contextual. Children are autonomous emergent systems, yet simultaneously entangled with parental patterns and with environmental and social influences. They carry sequences and structural legacies, yet these legacies are interwoven with novel patterns. Continuity does not imply replication. Divergence is inherent and essential. This entanglement persists even after physical separation. The atoms once constituting the parent continue to circulate in air, food, water, and soil. The molecules of DNA encode information that survives in descendants. The behavioral imprints of parental action persist in subtle but measurable ways across years. Thermodynamic principles offer further perspective. Life exists as a localized reduction of entropy, maintained through energy flows. Biological systems resist disorder by encoding and propagating ordered patterns of matter and information. Reproduction is one of the primary mechanisms by which these ordered patterns persist beyond the death of an individual organism. From this perspective, parent and child are successive expressions of a process designed to preserve continuity of pattern, to transmit functional information forward across generations. If one accepts that identity is an emergent pattern of matter and energy rather than a fixed collection of atoms or immutable consciousness, then parent and child are fundamentally entangled. The child is a continuation of a dynamic pattern that includes the parent's genetic, neural, and behavioral contributions, yet this continuation is neither complete nor deterministic. Divergence is guaranteed by new combinations of matter, environmental input, random mutations, and emergent experiences. The relational entanglement is further amplified through cultural and environmental channels. Language, gesture, habit, ritual, and imitation encode patterns that persist beyond individual lifespans. Parents, through teaching, modeling, and influence, extend not just matter but structured informational patterns, producing echoes in children that can persist for decades. The child in turn interacts with the world and contributes new variations, generating a recursive system of continuity and transformation. Quantum physics, a field Feynman helped pioneer, further complicates the classical notion of individuality. Entanglement demonstrates that interactions at the subatomic level create persistent correlations that defy classical separability. Though consciousness does not directly exploit quantum entanglement, the principle underscores the universe's resistance to rigid boundaries. Interacting systems remain correlated long after initial contact. Viewed from this lens, the parent and child are successive expressions of a process designed to preserve continuity of pattern, to transmit functional information forward across generations. If one accepts that identity is an emergent pattern of matter and energy rather than a fixed collection of atoms or immutable consciousness, then parent and child are fundamentally entangled. The child is a continuation of a dynamic pattern that includes the parent's genetic, neural, and behavioral contributions, yet this continuation is neither complete nor deterministic. Divergence is guaranteed by new combinations of matter, environmental input, random mutations, and emergent experiences. The relational entanglement is further amplified through cultural and environmental channels. Language, gesture, habit, ritual, and imitation encode patterns that persist beyond individual lifespans. Parents, through teaching, modeling, and influence, extend not just matter, but structured informational patterns, producing echoes in children that can persist for decades. The child, in turn, interacts with the world and contributes new variations, generating a recursive system of continuity and transformation. Quantum physics, a field Feynman helped pioneer, further complicates the classical notion of individuality. Entanglement demonstrates that interactions at the subatomic level create persistent correlations that defy classical separability. Though consciousness does not directly exploit quantum entanglement, the principle underscores the universe's resistance to rigid boundaries. Interacting systems remain correlated long after initial contact. Viewed from this lens, the parent and child are correlated systems, sharing matter, information, and emergent behavioral patterns. Boundaries are provisional, context-dependent, and emergent rather than absolute. The implications challenge conventional human intuition. Individuality appears solid because scale and perception mask the underlying continuity. Matter, energy, and information flow seamlessly across systems, but at the human scale, separation is necessary for survival, law, and society. Yet Feynman's perspective encourages recognition of a deeper continuity. The self is transient, a temporary structure maintained within larger networks of matter and information. The child is both continuation and divergence, entangled and independent, autonomous yet fundamentally connected. Death, from this perspective, does not terminate the influence of the parent's patterns. Matter disperses, information persists, and behavioral imprints reverberate through descendants. The observable distinction between parent and child, between self and other, between life and death, is therefore a convenience imposed by scale, perception, and survival, rather than a fundamental property of the universe. Children are nodes within a continuum, carrying material, genetic, neural, behavioral, and cultural patterns forward. They embody continuity, transformation, and divergence simultaneously, making the question of part of you both meaningful and profoundly complex. Understanding this entanglement reframes parenthood. Care, teaching, protection, and influence are not merely ethical or emotional acts, but structural interventions in ongoing patterns of matter, energy, and information that extend beyond individual lifespans. Love, instinct, and attachment are emergent properties of dynamic systems, biologically and physically reinforced. They ensure persistence of critical patterns, behavioral survival, and generational continuity. Viewed holistically, the parent-child relationship is less a dyad of separate beings and more a temporal, structural, and informational continuum where matter, energy, and pattern persist, transform, and propagate. The child is simultaneously new.
The self that never ends.
In parts 1 and 2, we explored how children are composed of the same atoms that formed their parents, inherit half of their genetic code, and internalize behavioral and neural patterns, establishing continuity that spans matter, information, and emergent cognition. In part 3, the inquiry deepens. What does this continuity mean for the self, consciousness, and the apparent boundaries of identity? Richard Feynman repeatedly emphasized that what humans perceive as separate, fixed, or permanent is an emergent artifact of scale. The universe at its most fundamental level is a continuous flow of matter, energy, and information, where boundaries are provisional, contextual, and largely perceptual. Consciousness, while emergent and profoundly complex, is itself a process, a dynamic pattern arising from electrical, chemical, and informational interactions in the brain. Memories, personality traits, emotional reactions, and decision-making are not static files preserved in isolation. They are continually reconstructed, reconfigured, and influenced by ongoing interactions with environment and other agents. When a child grows in the presence of a parent, the parent's neural and behavioral patterns directly shape the child's neural architecture. Language acquisition, emotional responses, moral frameworks, patterns of attention, and even subtle cognitive tendencies are internalized through repeated exposure and interaction. This creates an ongoing structural entanglement. The child is neurologically, behaviorally, and informationally influenced by the parent in ways that persist for decades. Yet the child is not a copy, not a replica, not a clone. Divergence is inherent, arising from environmental differences, new combinations of matter and energy, stochastic neural development, and independent experience. Continuity and novelty coexist. The child carries threads of the parent's patterns while simultaneously establishing unique configurations. From the perspective of physical and biological reality, individuality is a relative construct. At atomic and subatomic scales, particles obey laws indifferent to notions of ownership or separateness. At molecular and cellular scales, matter flows, mixes, and persists across bodies. At informational and behavioral scales, patterns propagate, transform, and persist beyond individual lifespans. The child is simultaneously a new system and a continuation of the parent's ongoing pattern. This relational entanglement extends beyond biology into the realm of culture and environment. Behavioral patterns, language, rituals, habits, moral lessons, and social interactions encode structured information that survives across generations. Parents extend their influence not only through DNA and neural imprinting, but through the structure of experience itself. Each interaction, repetition, and modeled behavior shapes emergent patterns that persist indefinitely, producing echoes of the parent's influence within the child and recursively within broader networks of social and environmental interaction. Evolution provides context to this phenomenon. Life is an ongoing process in which patterns that persist are selected, maintained, and propagated. Genes, behaviors, and cognitive tendencies that enhance survival and reproduction continue, often embedded within descendants. From this perspective, the child is a vessel for propagating the parent's patterns while generating divergence and innovation. The parent-child relationship, therefore, is both immediate and deeply structural emotional bonds. Care and guidance are not mere sentimental constructs, but emergent properties of entangled systems designed to preserve, transmit, and extend ordered patterns in a universe tending toward entropy. Quantum physics, which Feynman helped elucidate, reinforces the principle that interaction creates persistent correlations. Quantum entanglement illustrates that systems once coupled remain statistically correlated regardless of distance, a principle that, metaphorically, reflects the enduring structural influence parents impart to children. While consciousness is classical in scale, this principle underscores a broader truth. The universe does not enforce sharp boundaries. Systems interact, influence, and propagate patterns, creating persistent correlations that extend beyond apparent separation. Viewed holistically, the self is not a monolithic, isolated entity, but a transient node in a dynamic network of matter, energy, information, and behavioral influence. Children are nodes within this network, carrying inherited and internalized patterns, producing divergence and initiating new configurations in turn. Death in this framework is neither termination nor erasure. Matter disperses. Atoms re-enter the global circulation. DNA sequences propagate in descendants. Behavioral and cultural patterns echo through generations. The apparent finality of mortality is thus a construct of perception and scale. At deeper levels of matter, information, and process, continuity persists. Individuality, separateness, and identity are emergent at the scale necessary for human cognition, law, and social order, but they are provisional when measured against the universe's flowing, interconnected reality. The unsettling implication is that children are both separate individuals and extensions of their parents. They inherit matter, genetic information, neural architectures, behavioral template, and cultural patterns, creating a continuity of structure that persists beyond the parent's lifespan while simultaneously establishing unique configurations. Identity, consciousness, and selfhood are therefore relational and emergent. The line between parent and child is provisional, functional, and perceptual, not absolute. Parents influence, guide, shape, and invest into the child patterns of matter, energy, and information that extend beyond personal lifespan, yet the child's emergent processes generate novel configurations diverging from parental influence while retaining continuity. Viewed in the context of evolutionary time, life itself is an unbroken dynamic system, with individuals as transient expressions of patterns that endure, propagate, and transform. Feynman would likely remind us that understanding this does not diminish wonder. On the contrary, it elevates it. Recognition of continuity, entanglement, and structural inheritance underscores the extraordinary complexity of life. Identity is a branching, flowing pattern. Selfhood is transient, and relational matter and information propagate through countless systems across generations, and children are simultaneously autonomous, emergent entities and extensions of parental influence. The conceptual boundaries humans impose, self, other, parent, child, are pragmatic conveniences necessary for survival and social function, but they mask the profound underlying continuity of existence. Matter circulates, DNA propagates, neural and behavioral patterns influence, and cultural structures persist, creating an unbroken web of entangled systems. The child is a new configuration, a continuation of structural patterns, a branching flow in the river of matter, energy, and information that defines life itself. The parent is simultaneously dissolved into this flow and extended through it. Love, attachment, care, instruction, and guidance are structural interventions within this ongoing process, shaping emergent systems and ensuring continuity of pattern. Ultimately, the disturbing but profound realization emerges. Children are not merely related or influenced by their parents. They are part of the same ongoing system, a continuous expression of matter, information, and emergent behavior. Individuality is provisional, separation is apparent, and continuity is the underlying reality. Life is a network of flowing patterns, of structural inheritance and divergence, of entanglement that persists across time and scale. The parent and child are nodes within this system, both separate and continuous, both independent and entwined, a dynamic process that defies classical intuition, yet reveals the deep, elegant, and unsettling architecture of existence. In the end, Feynman's insight illuminates a universe in which identity is not fixed, boundaries are functional rather than fundamental, and children are simultaneously entirely themselves and inexorably part of the parent's ongoing pattern. Continuity, transformation, and propagation define life, and in this sense the self is never truly isolated, never wholly ended, and never entirely separable from the systems it influences and from which it emerges.